Good morning. This is a follow-up to yesterday's message. To everybody that's watched yesterday's video, just to let you know, I haven't received any response yet from Emily Matesic. Not that I was expecting anything too soon. Apparently Emily has just recently gone back to work after maternity leave, so I can imagine that things have been pretty hectic. And in fairness, I did send quite a lot of information for her to have a look at and consider, so I'm in no rush to receive a reply back. But I wanted to do this follow-up as something else to consider. You know, during Ken Kratz's efforts to make Stephen Avery look as bad as him, and remember, if you really want to know what a pervert looks like, one only needs to consider the obscene character of Ken Kratz. Indeed, I've done this series of many videos on the sexting career and the eventual fall of Ken Kratz. You know, from at one time wanting to be a politician to being a nobody, touting rubbish in the form of his book. As I say, he has always, Ken Kratz has always tried to present this image of Stephen Avery as some sort of monster. That in fact, Stephen Avery has always been a monster. And that the 18 years wrongfully convicted made him even worse. He came out hell-bent on extracting revenge on everybody around him. And of course we know that Mark Regan and Tom Fassbender put pressure on everybody that knows Stephen Avery to come up with stuff about him and say things about him that presented him as this awful character, somewhat similar as Ken Kratz. They tried to pressure Jodie into suggesting that Stephen Avery was far too interested in the physical contact and was far too active sexually, far too aggressive, and as I say, she told them to fade away. We hear also during Brendan's so-called confession that they ask him, Brendan, if Stephen Avery touched him inappropriately. And of course, Brendan, being the naive, honest person that he is, says, yeah, we used to have wrestling and for fun, and Steve would sometimes grab me between the legs because it's quite a good way of breaking a hold. But we know, we've seen quite clearly that Stephen Avery is very fond of Brendan Dassey, and I can fully understand why, when you consider that for 18 years he never had any contact with his own sons, and you know, had to come out and start a new life. Interesting, isn't it, that Stephen Avery, Brendan Dassey, they have similar IQs. You can imagine how they got on very well together. We hear that, for example, Brendan was learning to drive, didn't have a car, but Stephen Avery was going to help him get a car. Almost certainly as a result of some of the money that he was going to get. So there was no doubt that Brendan Dassey was going to be, is very fond of Steve, and Steve is very fond of Brendan. Nothing inappropriate, just uncle, nephew, and with him being the youngest of Barb's sons as well. You know, he would have known Brendan from the age of 14. Now, and obviously we hear that Stephen Avery is one of the is really the only one that at times can talk to Brendan. That there was one occasion when Brendan was supposed to be going to a birthday party, didn't want to go. Barb's trying to get him in the car. In the end, knows what to do, get Uncle Steve to help. We know that Stephen can talk to Brendan and help him in that matter. And we know that the reason why Brendan Dassey was sad and crying was A, because of the girlfriend situation, but also because of the fact that his good pal, his uncle, was locked up and he wasn't able to see him. As I say, the state, through Sweaty Prize, try and present the fact that it was only a matter of time before Stephen Avery let his primeval instincts take over and he would kill somebody. Now, Mike Holbach, some people would suggest that his comments about the grieving process could last days. Could last days. A few days later, you'll be all over it. You'll be recovered, Mike. It's bizarre. As I say, the fact that he's grieving, the fact that if he's grieving, he knows that of Teresa's demise. As I say, the family members are the last ones to ever accept that anything bad has happened to their loved ones, to the extent of when they're told, they don't even believe what they're being told. But some people would have us believe that Mike Holbach's comment was merely a slip of the tongue. It was because of the pressure he was under, because of the fact that he was so worried about where Teresa had got to, and that it doesn't mean anything, which of course is absolute nonsense. But let's consider it this way. Supposing Teresa Holbach hadn't disappeared. What if it was Brendan Dassey who had disappeared? Let's take the state opinion at face value. They, through Mark Wigan and Tom Fassbender, try and present Stephen Avery as this monster who was touching Brendan inappropriately. So what if it was Brendan Dassey that disappeared? And whilst Brendan Dassey was merely a missing person whom Stephen Avery was the last person to see alive, what if Stephen Avery, in an interview a few days later, said, the grieving process could last days? You can rest assured that the law enforcement officers and the media would immediately have considered that a confession. So again, I asked the question, what do we make of Mike Holbach's comments? They weren't simply a slip of the tongue. He knows something. He's not told anybody, as far as I know yet, but he knows. He was the family spokesperson. He knows far more than he's letting on. As I say, if it had been Stephen Avery, if Brendan had gone missing and Stephen Avery had said what Mike Holbach said, just think about that. The grieving process, he's only a missing person. The grieving process could last days. That would immediately, the law enforcement and the media would have jumped on Stephen Avery and said, ha, you've just confessed. Lock him up, send him away. Okay, as I say, we hopefully will, Emily, I hope you will deign to give me a response to some of the things that I've asked. Because I do think that some people, they don't consider what Mike Holbach said to be terribly important. I'm sorry, when you consider other cases such as the Soham murders, it was the breaker, the deal breaker. It was the one thing that then immediately led the police to solve the entire case. So please, if you have a moment, we would really appreciate a reply back with your thoughts on what on earth was Mike Holbach saying. Anyway, that's all I've got for today. Bye for now.